The Draugr Plague, Midwinter's Mouth. No living hand struck hide or wood within sight. Still the sound rolled toward the barren islet, entered the ribs of the damaged boats, and answered itself beneath the keel where the frozen hands remained locked. The survivors stood with the carved oars in their hands and did not answer. Astrid had told them not to. That command held better than courage. People bit their tongues. Children pressed faces into cloaks. A wounded man began a prayer and stopped before the first name of any god could leave him. The salt rite was only a few breaths old, and already it had teeth. No name called into water. No answer given to the dark, because the dark knew how to sound like kin. Ulfric stood at the landing with his axe in hand, but he did not raise it. There was nothing to strike. That made the drums worse. A man could feel brave against a door. Against an empty sea, bravery had no place to stand. Freya moved among the children and wounded, pushing them back from the shore. Her palm still bore ash. Her hidden brooch rested under her left arm where the leather guard pressed it close. It felt smaller than a thorn and heavier than a stone. Each drumbeat made the metal seem to remember that it was metal. She told herself that was fear. Leif stood beside the oars he had carved, one hand gripping the blade marked with flame, salt, mouth, broken ring, watching eye, and closed door. His throat still hurt from the rowing song. The names he had carried since the burned hall lay wrapped in oiled cloth under his coat, though many had already been carved or spoken. Names were never finished. They waited for the next mouth, the next fire, the next grief that needed witness. The drums sounded again. No one had counted how long they had been on the islet. Time had broken into tasks: lift the child, bind the seam, hide the salt, look away from the hands, do not answer the water. Hunger made every breath longer. Cold made every thought shorter. The new law had given them words, but words did not fill bellies, mend planks, or dry wool. The drums pressed against all of that. They made people feel not only afraid, but observed in their poverty. A girl tried to ask if the sound meant boats were coming. Her mother pressed a hand over her mouth before hope could fully form. Hope had become something the adults guarded as tightly as salt, because wasted hope left a worse thirst behind. Then the wind changed. It had blown from the water all night, sharp with salt and ice. Now it turned inland for a breath, crossed the stones, and came back from behind them as if it had passed through the burned village and returned with ash in its teeth. Leif heard the first name before anyone else. Halvard. It was not spoken by a human mouth. It came in the thin space after a drumbeat, drawn through the wind, soft and stretched, almost hidden in the scrape of ice. Leif's hand tightened on the oar. The next drumbeat came. Yrsa. The old woman near the ridge made a sound and clapped both hands over her mouth. Her wife's name had been spoken during the salt rite. Leif had heard it. Astrid had salted it. The clan had witnessed it. Now the wind carried it back, not with comfort, but with the patience of something counting debts. Ulfric turned toward Leif. Did you say that? No. Did anyone? No one answered. The wind moved through them again. Ragnar. Freya went still. The name entered the space beneath her ribs where the brooch lay hidden. A child's feast laughter crossed her memory with such force that for a moment she smelled smoke and warm milk instead of salt. She did not touch the brooch. She did not look down. She took Soren by the shoulder and moved him farther from the landing. Leif pulled the oiled cloth from under his coat with numb fingers. The list was wrinkled and damp at the edges. Some names had blurred. Some had been cut into wood before the longhouse burned. Some had been spoken at pyres. Some had been spoken only once, when the body took flame and everyone hoped the fire had done enough. The drums gave a slow blow. It was not loud, yet it made the small pools between stones tremble. Thin skins of ice shivered and cracked in rings. Even the boats answered with soft knocks from their seams, as if the wood remembered the rhythm of rowing and feared being commanded again. The wind said, "Eric." Leif looked at the cloth. The name was there, near a smear of ash. Another blow. Halla. There too. The survivors began to understand. Not all at once. Understanding came in the way people looked from Leif to the water, from the oars to the clouds, from their own ash-marked palms to the frozen hands beneath the keel. The wind was not inventing names. It was reciting the names Leif had recorded. That did not make Leif guilty in any simple way, and that was why it wounded him. Simple guilt could be confessed, salted, and placed before witnesses. This was worse. He had done what the clan had needed. He had kept the dead from becoming only missing weight in memory. He had written names so children would know who had burned, who had drowned, who had been brave, who had failed, who had still deserved to be named. Now the storm handled that same work like a thief handling a sacred cup. A young hunter whispered. The right called them. Astrid answered before panic could grow. The right witnessed them. That is the same. No, she said, but it is close enough to frighten fools. The drums continued. Name after name came through the wind. Not quickly, not like a crowd. Each one arrived after a beat, as if the empty sea had become a mouth too patient to tire. Some names were clear, others were broken by gale. A few were only syllables, yet mothers heard the missing halves and turned white. Men who had survived axes and ice shook when a brother's name came back without a body. Leif tried to cover the list. The wind spoke through the cloth. He tried to fold it away. The next name came from the carved oar instead. Bjorn. Leif dropped the oar as if it had burned him. The blade struck stone. No one laughed. No one cursed. The name had been cut into the wood before the departure, meant to keep a fisherman's memory from vanishing with the haul. Now the mark seemed less like preservation and more like a door with hinges no one had noticed. Astrid knelt and touched the oar. Do not fear the witness more than the crime. Leif's voice cracked. I wrote them down to keep them safe. The dead were never safe because we remembered them. What are they then? Our burden. The drums struck again. The wind recited another name from Leif's record, and every person on the islet heard that memory itself had become a road the storm could read. Astrid asked for the smallest fire. No one wanted to give her even that. Pitch was scarce. Dry wood was nearly gone. The boats needed mending before the next crossing, and every scrap that burned now might be missed when a seam opened under black water. Yet the names in the wind kept coming, each one after a drumbeat, each one taken from Leif's memory, work, and returned with cold around it. The people looked at the oars as if the marks might breathe. Ulfric gave the order. Bring shavings only. No ribs, no planks, no rope that still holds. The wording mattered. His oath without flavor had already made every command sound like judgment. If he spent too much fuel, the hungry would call him faith, drunk. If he spent none, the frightened would call him godless. He chose shavings because that was what leadership had become, a hand held between two accusations, trying not to drop the clan into either. Freya cut curls from a cracked thole pin and passed them to Astrid. She kept her left side away from the seer without knowing she had done it. The hidden brooch lay close. The wind had spoken Ragnar's name. It had not spoken Freya's guilt. Not yet. Leif sat on the stone with his list spread before him. He did not hold the oar anymore. He had set it beside him like a dangerous animal. The names on the cloth seemed darker than ink should be. Astrid placed the shavings in the lee of a rock. "Not for warmth," she said. She made Freya move the children back before the flame was struck. That hurt the children more than any speech. Their bodies leaned toward the place where warmth would be, and the law pulled them away before warmth existed. Several adults looked ready to protest. Then they remembered how quickly comfort became claim, how quickly claim became concealment, how quickly concealment gave the dead a handle. The lesson of the brooch had not been learned by them, because they did not know it, but the shape of such a lesson already lived in the rite. No one argued. Not for comfort. A child began to cry. The mother hushed him with fingers on his lips, not because crying was forbidden, but because every sound felt like bait. Astrid struck flint. The first sparks died. The drums spoke beyond the shore. The wind recited another name. She struck again. A small flame took, bent almost flat by gusts, then rose between her hands. The people leaned toward it despite themselves. Hope was a body before it was a thought. It saw flame and moved closer. Even after every pyre, every burned hall, every smoke-fed storm, the living still trusted fire the way infants trust breath. Astrid heard them move and closed her burned eyes beneath the cloth. Listen before you warm yourselves on a lie. Ulfric stood behind her. Speak. She held both hands over the little flame. When we burned the bodies, they did not rise in those bodies again. That was true. People clung to it at once. When Freya carried fire to the cairn, flesh broke. When we burned the longhouse, ancestors did not walk out of its door behind us. When a pyre takes well, hands stop clawing with that hand. Teeth stop biting with that mouth. Fire frees bodies. The flame brightened under a gust as if the words fed it. Then Astrid said the rest. The debt remains. The little hope around the flame recoiled. It did not vanish. That would have been easier. Instead, it changed shape. Some held the flame harder with their eyes, as if staring could force it back into old meaning. Some looked at the ash on their hands and seemed betrayed by their own obedience. A few looked angry enough to strike Astrid, because the messenger of a truth is often closer than the truth itself. She did not let them look away. Fire frees bodies. The debt remains. The sentence moved over the stones and made every old victory smaller. A man said, "Then burning was useless." Freya rounded on him. "Say that to the children who did not get dragged from their blankets by the burned." He flinched. Astrid lifted a hand. "No. Let the foolish sentence stand where all can see it. Useless is a word for people who want one tool to build the whole world. Fire is not useless. Fire saves flesh from rising. Fire buys hours. Fire cuts one rope. But the rope is tied to more than bone." The wind brought another name. Leif looked at the list. She was burned. "Yes," Astrid said. "Then why does the storm have her?" "Because fire freed what we could touch. It did not pay what was owed by greed, oath, silence, cowardice, longing, or the gold men loved more than warning." Ulfric's hand tightened on the haft of his axe. The old woman named Yrsa whispered, "My wife was not greedy." "No," Astrid said, softer now. And yet she lived in a world where greed opened the door. The innocent freeze in houses built by the guilty. That is why the truth is unbearable. The drums continued, slower now. The sea seemed to breathe between them. A hunter said, "What debt?" Someone else said, "Whose debt?" That question was more dangerous. It made people glance at Ulfric, then at the few raiders still living, then at widows, then at children who had never touched a coin but now shivered under the same storm. The clan had survived too much together to divide cleanly into guilty and innocent, but fear wanted that division. Fear wanted a neck for every rope. Astrid turned her blindfold toward him. "Do not ask me to name the whole debt so you may pretend it has edges. I know this much," Gold called. Hidden hands answered. Rights failed. Names were lost. Bodies were spared fire. Love held too long. Leaders chose scarcity and called it necessity. Survivors carried what should have been surrendered. The dead remember all of it, and the storm has a longer memory than we do. No one spoke. Some looked at Ulfric. Some looked at their own sleeves. Freya kept her arm close to her side. Leif said, "Then my records feed it. They feed us too." "How do I know the difference?" "You do not. That is why law exists, not because we know enough, because we know too little to be trusted alone." The flame bent, smoked, and threw sparks across the stone. Ash from the shavings rose into the wind. For a moment it blew toward the sea. Then the gust turned and drove the ash back into the faces of the survivors. People coughed. Children hid. Ulfric did not turn away. Freya closed one eye and kept the other on the shore. Leif covered the list with his body. Astrid let the ash strike her blindfold. "There," she said, "even fire returns what it cannot finish." The drums rolled beyond sight. The wind spoke another recorded name. The little flame burned on, useful and insufficient, while ash from the living's own right came back against their skin. Ulfric walked away from the fire before anyone could ask him to turn truth into command. He climbed the black ridge above the landing and stopped where the wind struck hard enough to make thought difficult. Below him, the survivors clustered around too little flame. The boats lay scarred on the stones. The frozen hands remained under the keel, pale through sealed ice. Beyond them the sea was empty, and beyond the emptiness the drums continued. North lay somewhere behind the storm. For many nights, North had been a word he used like rope. Tie the hungry to it, tie the grieving to it, tie the frightened to it. Helgardr had been rumor, old speech, a name in mouths that wanted a last direction. It had not needed to be proven because the clan had needed it to be useful. A leader could not feed people with doubt. Now Astrid's words had cut the rope. Fire frees bodies. The debt remains. If that was true, then what did a safe island mean? What did untouched land mean if the debt traveled in names, gold, guilt, and the unseen weight people carried under their ribs? A shore could refuse dead feet and still receive living sin. A hall could have warm walls and still be opened from within by a hidden hand. A place could be real and still not be salvation. Ulfric hated the thought because it sounded like wisdom and cowardice wearing the same cloak. Freya came up behind him. She did not ask permission. She never had when the question mattered. "The people are watching you, not watch them," she said. "I know." "Then stop giving them your back." He looked at her. The wind pulled hair across her face. She was pale. Everyone was pale, but hers had a drawn tightness he could not name. He thought of the oath. "No one spared, nor those I love." The words had been clean when spoken and filthy now that they would need using. "Do you believe in Helgardr?" he asked. Freya's eyes narrowed. "That is a dangerous question to ask where others can hear. Only you hear it. That does not make it safe." He looked north again. "Do you?" She stood beside him. For a moment she did not answer. Beneath her guard, the brooch pressed into her side as if it had leaned closer to listen. Below them, Soren coughed in his sleep and curled tighter under the torn cloak. Freya looked down at him, and the answer she might have given changed. It was one thing to speak of hope when only warriors were listening. It was another with children beneath you, children who had already learned that mothers could become anchors and ropes could become enemies. If she stripped every promise from the air, what would be left for them to breathe? Freya had never needed Helgadra the way some did. She had needed enemies with bodies, children behind her, a command clear enough to obey or defy, and Ulfric alive long enough to keep the clan from tearing itself apart. A holy shore was too far away for her hands. But after the longhouse burned, after Soren's rope, after the eyelet and the drums, even she had felt the pull of a place where watchfulness might loosen for a breath. She despised herself for wanting it, because wanting made a person easy to lead and easier to break.
"I believe in next shore," she said. "That is not the same."
"No, it is more useful." He almost smiled. The expression failed before it became visible. "I have told them. Helgadra waits beyond the ice. You have told them we move north. I have let them hear more." Then stop. The simplicity struck harder than comfort would have. Ulfric said, "If I tell them the promise may be only rumor, some will break. If you keep feeding them a promise the storm can eat, they will break later and blame every law between now and then. You sound like Astrid." "No. Astrid would make it hurt more." The drums rolled over the water. The wind carried a name neither of them knew. Or perhaps they had known it once and lost it. That possibility was worse. Ulfric lowered himself onto a stone. He had stood through rowing, landing, oath, and revelation. Sitting felt like surrender, so he did it where only Freya could see. "My brother was buried with gold," he said. Freya did not move. "You know that." "I know enough. I called it honor. I called it his due. I called it what a man of blood deserved. When Astrid warned me, I heard insult. When men hid pieces, I called them weak, as if my own hand had not taught them what gold could mean. The wind hit them with ice grains. If debt remains," he said, "then I have been leading them away from a shore while carrying the first road inside me." Freya wanted to say no. Loyalty rose in her by habit, armed and ready. But the brooch under her guard kept her silent. A lie told for him would also shelter her. She knew it, and the knowledge tasted like metal. "You are not the only road," she said at last. "That is not forgiveness." "It was not meant to be." He nodded. "Good." Below, a child cried out as another name came through the wind. The sound made Ulfric stand. "Will you tell them?" Freya asked. He looked at the camp. "That Helgadra may not save us." The name itself seemed to change as he said it. A moment before, it had been a far shore. In his mouth now, it became a test of whether a people could walk toward hope without worshipping it. He had led raids toward known harbors with less fear than he felt speaking one doubtful word before cold refugees. "Yes. If I do, I may kill the last warm thing they carry. If you do not, the storm will kill it for you and wear your voice while doing it." That was Astrid after all, whether Freya meant it or not. Ulfric descended to the fire. People turned as he came. They had been waiting for him to give the revelation a smaller shape, something they could pack beside meal and rope. He had no such thing. He stood before them with ash on his face and salt still remembered on his tongue. "You have heard Astrid," he said. The faces before him were not the faces of a village anymore. They were a traveling wound trying to arrange itself into a people. Smoke had taken their roof. Water had taken their skiff. Law had taken some of their keepsakes. The storm was now taking the mercy of believing that the dead, once burned, had fully left them. Ulfric saw each loss and knew that his next words would either make them smaller for a moment or make him smaller forever. No one answered. You have heard the wind speak our dead from Leif's keeping. You have heard the drums where no living boat shows itself. I will not name this victory. I will not call the salt rite a cure. I will not tell you fire ends what our sins began. The group tightened around the words. A woman said, Then why go north? Ulfric looked toward the storm. Because staying here kills us. That is all? For now, yes. Hope shuddered among them. Not dead, wounded. Helgadra may be refuge, he said. It may be rumor. It may be a place that teaches harder truth than this stone. I do not know. A man whispered, You said it was safe. I said we would seek it. I let you hear safety because I wanted it too. That confession cost him more than the oath. An oath could be hard and still look like strength. Doubt looked like hunger. Ulfric raised his axe, not high, not in triumph, only enough that the metal caught the little fire. I am still bound without favor. I still enforce the right. I still take hidden gold if it is found. I still burn bodies when fire can be spared. I still lead north if north opens. But hear me. North may be direction, not salvation. The drums answered from the empty sea, and this time no one could pretend the sound was far away. The first sign was not a hand. It was a prayer. It came from the shore below the landing, half buried under the drums and the wind, recited names. At first, the survivors thought another living person had begun to speak by mistake. Several turned angrily, ready to silence whoever had forgotten the new law. Then the words came again, thick with water and frost, and no living throat on the islet shaped them. Astrid lifted her head. Back from the water. Freya was already moving. The prayer crawled out of the surf in broken pieces. Not a god's name clearly, not a blessing whole enough to comfort. A phrase repeated too many times until its meaning had worn away and only hunger remained. The storm carried it up the stones, and each repetition made the little fire gutter. Leif snatched the oiled list and tucked it under his coat. Ulfric ordered the children behind the ridge. Men reached for spears. Women who could stand took knives from belts. No one ran. Running had become too expensive. A shape rose where the water met ice. It did not climb like a raider or crawl like a drowned thing. It came upright too slowly, as if still standing in a hall no one else could see. Ice broke from its shoulders in plates. Water poured from its sleeves. For a breath it looked almost harmless, an old priest lost in storm, trying to find his flock. Then the smell reached them, salt, grave, cold wool, and prayer turned sour by too many years in a shut mouth. It had once worn priest's wool. The cloth clung to it in frozen strips, black at the hem, white at the shoulders where frost had built like old ash. A cord hung around its neck with bone charms and a little iron prayer ring. No gold showed. That made the thing more terrible, not less. Greed was not the only chain the dead knew. Its hands were folded as if around an invisible bowl. Its mouth opened and closed with the prayer that would not finish. A faith-bound dead man, Astrid had once named such things in warning. Not evil in the way children meant evil. Worse. A prayer that had refused to end when breath did. The priest, Draugr, stepped onto stone. The stone should have stopped it for a breath. Salt had dried there from waves. Ash had touched it from the right. Living feet had made it theirs through suffering. None of that was enough to forbid the dead entirely. The thing slowed, and that mattered. but it still came. That was the cruel measure of every rule they had made, not whether it ended danger, but whether it delayed danger long enough for a living hand to act. The little fire bent toward it, and then away. Salt grains on the oar blades darkened with melt. The frozen hands under the keel twitched, not breaking free but remembering motion. Ulfric came down with his axe. Freya barred him with the haft of her own. This one is mine. There is no mine in law. There is in reach. The dead priest lifted its head. Its eyes were not bright like coins. They were pale, filmed, and wet with a kind of devotion that had rotted instead of dying. The prayer came again. This time one word was clear enough to make an old woman sob. It was mercy. The Draugr took another step. The bow of the last boat clicked. Everyone heard it. The frozen hands beneath the keel had moved when the dead priest moved, and now the sound came again, smaller, like nails testing wood. The faith, bound dead, had not come alone in meaning, even if it came alone in body. It had woken every proof that the dead still held what carried the living. A man flung a spear. The point struck the priest's shoulder and stuck. The body rocked, then continued. Its folded hands opened. Frost cracked along the fingers. The prayer did not stop. Astrid called, "Do not answer it." The warning came too late for one wounded man. He had been a temple servant before the raids, or perhaps only lonely enough to remember kneeling. He whispered the next word of the prayer. The dead priest turned toward him. Freya crossed the stones before it could take another step. Her axe struck its forearm and broke the bone with a sound like green wood snapping under ice. The arm swung loose. The priest did not cry out. It leaned toward her, mouth still working. Freya heard the prayer from very close. It was not asking a god for mercy. It was asking mercy to become a door. Beneath her left arm, the hidden brooch stabbed her through cloth as she twisted. Pain ran along her ribs. For one terrible instant, the priest's head turned toward that small pressure of gold. Not fully, not knowingly, only a shift, a hunger noticing warmth in snow. Freya brought her elbow in and drove the brooch harder against herself so the pain would keep her honest. "No," she said. It was not only refusal of the dead priest, it was refusal of the brooch, though no one heard that. Refusal of the part of herself that had already made an exception and wrapped it in grief. Refusal of the easy lie that sacred words belonged to those who used them last. If the dead could wear prayer like a snare, then the living had to take prayer back with dirty hands. The priest, Draugr, reached for her face. She stepped inside the reach and began to pray. The words were old. Not Astrid's salt rite, not Leif's record. A childhood prayer for the dead before winter burial, taught by women who had believed the gods listened if the words were clean. Freya had not spoken it since the first cairn failed. Now she spoke it as a weapon, not because she believed it would save the world, but because the dead thing had made prayer into a hook, and she would not let it own every sacred word. "Cold earth hold what fire cannot," she said. The priest's mouth faltered. "Silent gods hear what men cannot." She struck its knee. The body dropped, but one hand caught her cloak and pulled. Cloth tore. The brooch shifted under her guard. She thought of Ragnar spinning in the longhouse. She thought of Soren tied to the drowned mother. She thought of the law she had broken and the oath Ulfric had sworn. Named dead, do not feed on the living. The priest lunged from its knees. Freya set her boot against its chest and swung the axe with both hands. The blade took the head at the side of the neck. Not cleanly. Nothing was clean now. Bones split. Frozen flesh cracked. The prayer broke into a wet hiss. The body fell forward, hands clawing once at the stone before the little fire flared and the ash smoke struck it. Ulfric moved in to finish the body with fire. Astrid stopped him. Small flame. Only enough to free the flesh. He stared at her. "The debt remains," she said. He understood and hated that he did. They used shavings, not planks. Freya stood over the body while the priest's wool caught and smoked. The smell was salt, old cloth, and something colder than rot. Leif did not write the prayer. He wrote only that a faith-bound priest came from the water, and Freya answered prayer with prayer before the axe fell. He paused after writing that much. The old Leif would have shaped the line until it pleased the ear. He would have found a rhythm that made Freya larger and the terror cleaner. Now he left the sentence rough. Some acts deserved witness without polish. Some victories became lies when made too beautiful. Soren watched from behind the ridge, eyes wide and dry. Freya turned away before he could see her touch her side. She did not check whether the brooch had torn free. She knew it was still there. Its point had marked her skin. Its gold had remained hidden through law, prayer, and death. The priest, Draugr, burned low. The body slackened. The storm did not. Freya stood over ash and broken ice with prayer still bitter on her lips, her axe dark in her hands, and her secret pressed close enough to hear her heart. The burning of the priest, Draugr ended the body, and nothing else. That was the shape of the new truth. When the last frost, blackened bone cracked, the thing stopped moving. Its mouth no longer formed the broken prayer. Its hands no longer reached toward the wounded man who had answered it. The living had been spared that body. No one on the islet could deny it. Fire had done what fire could do. Then the wind recited another name. Not the priest's. Not one anyone expected. The name came from Leif's list, soft as ash crossing water, and it proved Astrid's confession without mercy. The burned could still be remembered by the storm. The freed flesh did not free the world. Hope had to live inside that truth or become another lie. The survivors stood between the corpse ash and the carved oars. They looked older than they had before the drums began. Some had lost belief in fire. Some had lost belief in North. Some had lost only the easy shape of those beliefs, which hurt more because it left work behind. Ulfric ordered the boats checked again. No one moved at first. "Now," he said. The oath without favor returned to his voice. It did not promise safety. It gave the frightened something exact to do. Men and women went to hulls, ropes, seams, and oars. Children were counted by touch and name. The wounded were moved farther from the water. Salt was guarded. Ash was saved. The priest's remains were marked apart until more fire could be spared. Leif gathered the oars. One blade still held the smear of salt Astrid had spent on the Covenant. Another had a new notch from being dropped when the wind spoke through it. Leif ran his thumb over the damage and felt shame rise again, sharp as hunger. He wanted to scrape the marks away. He wanted to carve them deeper. Both desires frightened him because both pretended a tool could make the terror simple. He touched each carved mark, not as a blessing, but as a check against forgetting. Flame for body, salt for memory, mouth for name, broken ring for gold refused, watching eye for rope, closed door for the dead not called. The marks felt rougher after the wind had used other marks to speak. Astrid stood at the highest stone, blindfold turned toward the storm. No one had guided her there. She had climbed by hearing where the wind broke against rock and where frightened breathing gathered below. Her burned eyes were hidden, but her face looked more exposed than any sighted face on the islet. The confession had cost her too. A seer who removes false hope does not stand outside the grief she makes. Freya climbed to her with the axe still in hand. "Did we do enough?" Freya asked. "No." The answer was immediate. Freya almost laughed, but there was no humor in it. "You might soften one answer before I die." "Soft answers are how the dead learn our doors." "Then what did we do? Enough to still be judged." Freya looked at the sea. Her side hurt where the brooch had pricked her. The wound was small. That seemed obscene. Such a little wound for such a large lie. "Can judgment be survived?" she asked. Astrid turned toward her. "Sometimes, not unchanged." Freya looked away before the blind woman could read what sight did not need. Below them, Ulfric stood beside the boat with the frozen hands under the keel. Men had chipped the ice around the fingers but had not hacked them free. The hands were loosening as the tide shifted, not by mercy but by movement. One finger cracked and fell away. Another remained hooked deep in a seam. Ulfric watched it as if it were a question he would have to answer with his own bones. Leif came to him with the oars. "The rear boat can take water, but not much of it. Then it takes people, not memory." Leif nodded. "Memory has already become heavy." "Still carve." "I will. Still record names." Leif looked at the storm. "Even if the wind reads them." Ulfric did not answer quickly. This was the new world. Every useful act had a shadow. Every law had a wound under it. "Yes," he said, "but record before witnesses. Keep no secret names." Leif accepted that. It was not comfort. It was law learning how to walk. The drums slowed. Everyone heard the change. Work stopped again, not from disobedience, but because the whole islet seemed to hold breath. The sound that had come over empty sea grew farther apart. Between the beats, the storm gathered itself. Snow, ash, and ice grains turned in the air. The sky above the water thickened until it looked low enough to strike with an oar. Then the clouds split. No thunder came. No god spoke clearly. No hand descended to lift them from the stones. The storm simply opened from horizon to horizon in a long, torn mouth, and green fire burned behind it. Aurora spilled through the gap. It did not move like ordinary light. It ran northward in bands, pale green, blue, white, and deep violet, twisting above the sea as if the sky had revealed a road made from wound and flame. The ice below caught the glow. Black water became silver, edged. Broken flows shone like shields abandoned by giants. Far off, beyond the lanes that had seemed impassable, the light marked a passage through the storm. People began to whisper. North. Helgadra. Road. Astrid raised her hand. "Do not name promise where only path is shown." The whispers faltered. Ulfric climbed the ridge and stood below the open sky. Green light moved over his face, making him look both living and already remembered. "We go that way," he said. A man asked, "Because it is safe?" Ulfric looked from the auroral road to the ash of the priest, to the carved oars, to the boat still marked by dead hands. "Because it is shown," he said, "not because it is safe." That answer held. It held because it did not lie. The gap widened. In the far north, the aurora bent downward until it seemed to touch the sea. For a breath, the light formed a shape like an open road. Then the same light darkened at its edges, and the road looked like the inside of a throat. Some knelt. Some refused to kneel because kneeling felt too much like belief. Ulfric did neither. Astrid stood with her head tilted, listening to the shape of awe around her. Freya watched the children watching the sky and hated the beauty for reaching them so easily. Leif's hand moved toward his knife, then stopped. He would record it, but not yet. First, he would survive seeing it. Midwinter's mouth, Leif thought, and did not say it aloud. The storm had not given salvation. It had opened and shown direction. It had shown that the world was larger than the islet, crueler than the dead under the keel, and still willing to point. That was almost worse than silence. Silence could be cursed and endured. A sign demanded movement. A road asked the hungry to become travelers again. It asked damaged boats to trust black lanes, wounded rowers to lift oars, children to leave the only stone currently under their feet. It asked the clan to carry law, doubt, ash, names, and hidden sins into whatever waited north. The drums sounded once more from the empty sea. This time they did not call names. They marked the path. The survivors stood under the torn sky, faces lit by cold aurora, while north burned open above black water. The road shone ahead, beautiful and warning together, and no one on the barren islet could mistake it for mercy. Thank you for listening. This chapter ends here, but the story continues. Follow the series for new chapters, and when you are ready, explore the other worlds and storylines waiting beyond this one. If you enjoyed this episode, leaving a like or a comment helps more listeners find the story.